Right, Frank Bonada here for LowKick MMA. Joining me today is Ross Markey, making his debut on the LowKick preview show. We're going to be breaking down Bellator Dublin, which takes place this Friday. Ross is going to be there in person. How are you feeling about this card, mate?
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for having me. It's great to finally make my debut in the hot seat, so to say. I'm looking forward to the card. It's a good card, top to bottom. Looking forward to the co-main and main event. We've got Romero, Melvin Manhoef from the co-main event, and then we've got that lightweight fight, Peter Queally, Benson Henderson. So promise to be fireworks as per usual at the point.
100%. Let's get into that main event. Benson Henderson, a real sort of legend of the game. Everyone knows about his sort of storied career with the UFC and now plying his trade with Bellator. He's taking on Peter Queally, who's obviously going to be the sort of home crowd favorite, has one of the most electric walkouts in front of an Irish crowd that you'll ever see. Yeah, a sort of veteran versus veteran matchup. Queally's a decent favorite in this one. Sorry, Henderson's a decent favorite going into this fight so far. How do you see this fight playing out, Ross? What's your sort of initial read on it?
Well, initially it's a tough fight on paper for Queally, especially to return from, you know what I mean, he's out of action since November last year when he fought Patricky Pitbull in that rematch for the title, and he's had shoulder surgery. He was obviously forced out of that fight with Kane Musa back in February with that rib injury as well. But Benson's kind of a smooth operator, you know what I mean? Pardon the pun on his nickname. He's a smooth operator when it comes to it. He knows the rope at this stage of his career. He's got 4 fights left, and he's openly said that he's planning to fight those 4 fights and call it a day. But he has one thing in mind, like coming off that Islam Mamedov win earlier, I think it was May of this year. He kind of has one thing back in mind, just to climb that ladder again. It's a really tough fight for Peter, especially, like, I know Benson's the clear veteran here, but Peter's been around the circuit as well. Like, he's fought in Russia for years. It is a tough fight, but I think if I have to give a general look at things, it's got to be laid for Peter. He's going to have to grow into the fight. You know what I mean? He takes it himself. He grows into a fight the longer the fight goes on. But it's going to be one of these performances where it's pivotal for him. You know what I mean? More or less coming off that loss to Patricky, and he has one eye on that Patricky fight as well in the future. But it's a real pivotal fight for him at lightweight.
It's a huge fight, yeah. And I imagine the pressure on his back is massive, fighting in front of a home crowd again. I suppose the one thing you can sort of say in Queally's favour, his last fight, he's knocked out by Patricky Pitbull. Henderson's not the hardest hitter out there. He's got some slick strikes, but yeah, he's not really going out and knocking people out anymore, at least. The Islam Mamedov fight, really impressive win. Mamedov's a very elite fighter. And I think a lot of people had, beforehand, were predicting Mamedov was going to pick up a win there. So credit due to Henderson for getting that win. But yeah, it's an interesting one. Queally's got that power. And I mean, Henderson knocked out against Michael Chandler. Was that 4 fights ago? Obviously, Chandler hits harder than most, like the average Joe. But yeah, it is an interesting one. I do feel like there are probably going to be extended periods of control time for Benson Henderson in this fight. But I wouldn't discredit Queally, especially in front of an Irish home crowd. And you got to wonder. I mean, well, at this point, Henderson's probably seen it all. He's like I say, he's a proper veteran. But maybe at this time in his career, having an aggressive Irish crowd against him, maybe that shakes up the match and makes it a bit closer. Yeah, really great fight. I don't want to. I think it's a hard one to predict, like to give like an outright. Oh, I think Queally's going to win. I think Henderson's going to win. Henderson probably has a more clear route to victory, but I'd say Queally has the potential to stop the fight in a moment. I know you're going to be there in person, so I don't know if you want to give your actual predictions in this one, Ross, or are you sort of just going to enjoy it?
I just wanted to touch on that point that you made there about the home crowd. You know what I mean? It's a lot to be said about that Tree Arena, that Point Arena, that's just crowd, like just the raucous, like the noise in that arena, man, when it takes off, like even for his walker, like, but beyond that, like you mentioned there, like Queally has that power in his hands, and Benson even mentioned at that media day, Severe MMA, they're doing great work ahead of this card. He mentioned that Queally has that good switch kick, but he doesn't utilize it a lot against southpaws. But even at that, like Benson, like you mentioned there, like a lot of control time. You can just maybe see a lot of control time in defense. Like Benson's an all-rounders, and he can do everything well. He can strike well, he can grapple well, he can wrestle with the best of them. You know what I mean? He's been up and down this road so many times, but I think Queally's gonna have to drag this late, and it kind of depends what sort of Peter shows up. You know what I mean? He's been around the block, as has Benson. You know what I mean? But maybe it's a thing of like he had that shoulder surgery earlier this year, and it's a tough one to call. It really is a tough one to call. But you'd have to kind of think maybe the later this fight goes on, the more Peter can kind of grow into this and just settle into the cage in front of an adopted hometown crowds, more or less, in Dublin.
Yeah. That's it would be great to see Queally pick up a win. I feel like
it seems as if you're gonna kind of catch Benson at this stage of his career, as smooth as Benson is, you know what I mean? It's to catch him at this stage where he not maybe has one foot at the door, maybe one eye on the closing chapter of his career. He's got the 4-fight contract with Bellator, and it seems, I wouldn't chalk it up to perfect timing, you know what I mean, to that extent, but it's maybe you could just see, maybe you could just catch him at this stage of his career. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. I'm just looking back now. Has Henderson ever won a fight via KO? Not since his 9th pro fight back in.
Really, it's that long ago, yeah.
2009 against Shane Roller.
I think his last TKO win at least was that leg injury against Patricky, wasn't it? I think 2016.
Yeah.
So,
the TKO win of the leg injury. Yeah, you're right. But via strikes, actual KO was 2009. Wow. Should be a great fight, like a fan-friendly fight between two proper veterans, like we've said. So, yeah, that's the main event of the night. Let's move on to the co-main. We have Yoel Romero, the Soldier of God, taking on Melvin Manhoef. I mean, we said the last one's a veteran fight. This time we have a 45-year-old in Romero taking on a 46-year-old in Manhoef, which is bonkers. But then you look at someone like Romero. Well, you know what? Both men, their physiques. Play that of a man much younger than who they really are. Romero, a huge -700 favorite going into this fight. Now he's coming off that win over Alex Queally, which was a bit of a weird fight. But Romero just clearly the superior athlete, as he often is. And Manhoef obviously knocked out by Corey Anderson. Anderson, a really elite fighter. Like, let's be honest, he could still be fighting in the top 5 of the UFC. So there's no real shame in that loss. I have to lean towards Romero just on based off just physicality alone. The man really is a freak athlete, and he has a well-rounded skill set. It's more the issues with Romero is his application of his skill set to his fights. Everyone, of course, remembers the bizarre Israel Adesanya fight where he stands there for the whole fight, essentially. Just truly bizarre. But he still has that power, and I think it'll be enough to knock out a 46-year-old Melvin Manhoef. What are your thoughts on this fight, mate?
I'd have to agree 100%. Like, you brought up the Alex Queally fight in Paris earlier this year. He more or less just played with his food, didn't he, for the majority of that fight? You know what I mean? He was cruising for a lot of that fight before the eventual finish. But like you mentioned, just physique wise, like the last thing to go with both of these guys is power. Like Melvin Manhoef has some crazy stat. I think 29 knockouts and 32 total victories, one of the highest percentages for active fighters or something like that at the moment. But again with Melvin more or less said today at today's media day that this is his swan song. Like, you know what I mean? He's accepted the fact that this is likely his last fight. You know what I mean? Another 2 guys that have been around the block, top promotions. But yeah, no, you kind of, it's like the people's main event, isn't it? More or less, this is what's going to attract the attention. You kind of have to fancy Yoel at this stage of his career. Like, not too long ago, I know he kind of had that barren run and that kind of skid in the UFC towards the end of his tenure. But even like Luke Rockhold that's still a decent win in hindsight. You know what I mean? Considering like he has 100%. A lot of wins over like very, very high level middleweights. Suppose at his kind of fucking swan song as well. You know what I mean? Of his career, his tenure.
Remember, if you look at those losses as well, included in that like sort of run of losses in the UFC is the Robert Whittaker, the second fight, was the split decision loss. The Paulo Costa decision loss, which a lot of people could argue that he won that fight. Both those fights, they don't tell the full story when you just look at like, a 4-fight losing streak. You know,
you kind of see his record and you see those skids and you're like, oh, maybe it's time for him to, he's not at that level anymore. But even like you just brought up that point there, that rematch with Robert Whittaker, I think if you look at that fight and you take that fight as a whole, like break it down round by round based on the new criteria, you kind of have to maybe look at Yoel maybe as a winner in that fight. You know what I mean? That was a very close fight. I remember initially I thought Well, it was a very close fight, of course. Like, it wasn't a dubious decision or whatever, but it was just, you easily could have scored that either way, which just goes to show, like, even at that stage of his career, he was, you know what I mean, however old he was in his late 30s at that stage of his career as well. Like, it was only a couple of years ago against Whitaker, that rematch. And even at that, he had more than held his own, you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. And the fact that Whitaker's essentially the second best middleweight in the world, still now, it just shows how well that fight holds up. So, I think there isn't any other way you can go other than probably a Romero KO. Maybe late, because he's a weird guy, isn't he? Like,
we may see a third round Yoel emerge again.
Yeah, 100%. But it'll be a spectacle for as long as it lasts.
Absolutely.
And I do envy you being there live in person to watch Romero and Manhoef.
Well, like you said, it's a spectacle. It's a spectacle to see Yoel on any stage of his career, just, you know what I mean, before he bows out as well. And it's kind of a lot of people are kind of questioning Bellator's stance on making this kind of matchup between himself and Melvin, but you have to kind of lean towards a Yoel win, don't you, on paper?
Yeah, of course, 100%. It's going to be interesting to see how long he sticks around, because he started his MMA career late, didn't he? So, and it's not like he looks like his chin isn't cracking, and he still looks.
He wants to test middleweight as well. He said after his fight with Melvin, he wants to go back to middleweight. Now, we all know his well documented weight cutting issues in the past to get to the middleweight limit. But I'd like to see him continue at light heavyweight for the remainder of his tenure with Bellator anyway. And obviously that fight that we lost, I think it was last year, maybe even the year before, against Rumble Johnson. Hopefully we get to see that in the future. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they have to book that, don't they? If
that has to happen eventually.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. Now, obviously, different sites have different listings, but right now I've got Leah McCourt versus Diana Silva up next. Leah McCourt's a strange one, isn't she? Like, super talented grappler, like always got a very good submission threat. I was there in person to watch a fight. I think was it Janae Harding, or maybe in the fight prior to that, where she ended up, like, having to fight a stand-up fight for quite extensive periods of time. She showed off like quite a nice jab, but I suppose not like too much depth to her striking game. I feel like Bellator want her to be something big, something really big, like the next sort of Northern Irish star. Obviously dropped the loss to Sinead Kavanagh 6 months ago. Diana Silva is not someone I'm super familiar with, but of course a win over Janae Harding as well, most recently. But prior to that, KO loss to Blancow, and then a split decision loss to Julia Budd. This isn't a fight I have a big read on. The odds are essentially evens as well, so that kind of reflects how close this fight is. Do you have a particular read on this fight, mate?
I think what you mentioned there about Leah McCourt being a bit of a strange one, I think it's more just chalked up the fact that her judo and her overall wrestling and grappling ability is just so, there's leaps and bounds between that and her striking, and her striking's ever improving, of course. I think it's just, like you mentioned as well, they kind of have their eye on Leah as kind of the next wave, and you know what I mean, with Cyborg approaching possibly the end of her tenure with Bellator, at least they kind of have their eye on Leah and this next big star, you know what I mean? But she's done the majority of her camp over in Liverpool with Next Generation with Molly and Paddy. She has, and Molly's going to be there this weekend as well. So just that support system around her. But no, her striking is definitely going to catch up working with Molly and Paddy 100%. But I think it's just more of a thing where her judo is second to none really in that division. You know what I mean? Compared to like all the grapplers surrounding her at featherweight. But it just leaves the hole between her striking that needs to just catch up a little bit. You know what I mean? Just so she rounds herself out more. But no, Diana Silva's been in there with, like, you know what I mean, Julia Budd, Arlene Blanco, they're stalwarts of featherweight for Bellator over the years. But no, all kind of signs point toward Leah just getting back into her comfort zone. You know what I mean? Like that fight against Sinead Kavanagh last February, I'd seen nothing like that in ages. That was just touted and billed beforehand as the biggest All Ireland fight on the island in years, arguably ever. And it completely delivered. Like the noise in the Point Arena that night was incredible. But no, it'll be good for Leah to just kind of settle in. You know what I mean? Settle back into that group, because she was enjoying a good run before that loss to Sinead. But No, Leah just needs to round out her game more or less. You know what I mean? She definitely has the skill sets to be a top contender 100% in that division, but it's just, you know what I mean, getting that confidence behind her striking ability just to round it up and reach that level where her judo just shines. You know what I mean?
100%. I always forget that Leah McCourt has her first professional win is over Manon Fiero.
I was going to mention that, yeah, Manon, yeah, she has a win over Manon, yeah.
Mental that back at Cage Warriors, her first
It's a good
professional
skill to
win.
have.
Yeah, 100%. That's really developed into an amazing name to have in a resume. I haven't got too much more to say on this fight. It's close, but I think it's one that I don't want to call it a gimme for McCourt, but you know, it's kind of a fight that maybe she should be fighting a slightly higher level of opposition, and this is one that Bellator have given her to get her back on the winning track, or maybe just to show if she's good enough to be in there with the very elite of the division.
Yeah, it's a home soil fight. You know what I mean? It's a home soil fight as well. You know what I mean? She's a massive star over here, and she's headlined in the Tree Arena before on short notice. But Diana Silva is a tough out. You know what I mean? Like, she's lost to Julia Budd, ex-champion. You know what I mean? Arlene Blenko, perennial contender. Janae Harding. You know what I mean? They share that opponent, of course. But no, it's a hometown fight, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? For Leah that way.
100%. Okay, probably the fight I think I might be looking forward to the most on the card is up next. Mads Burnell, Pedro Carvalho. What a fight that is, a featherweight. We spoke about this off camera, but I'm a huge fan of Mads Burnell. I think he's exceptionally talented. Unlucky to get not unlucky. He did lose to Adam Borix, but I really thought he was on a run there and might have a shot at fight for the title, because I think he's incredibly talented. Slick boxer. Like, I think he's had a few pro boxing bouts in his time, and his sort of grappling game is one of the best in the division. This is a man who submitted Saul Rogers, who anyone who watched it was the McGregor season of The Ultimate Fighter, when Saul just like ran through essentially everyone and then got cut before he could fight in the final due to visa issues. But yeah, Burnell wins over Saul Rogers. Emmanuel Sanchez, former title challenger, over at Cage Warriors. Fans of Cage Warriors will know guys like Dean Truman, Steve Amable as well. I always pronounce his name wrong, but yeah, and of course he's also fought in the UFC. This man was beating Arnold Allen before he got caught in a front choke later on. Everyone knows how good Arnold Allen is right now, in essentially what is likely a number one contender fight with Calvin Kattar coming up soon. So I think Mads Burnell is elite. I really do. I think he's good enough to fight and probably even win a Bellator title in the future. Taking on Pedro Carvalho, who's not quite lived up to the potential that was built from, I think, unfortunately. Right now, 1-3 in his last 4 fights. In the mix, obviously, is a KO loss to Patricio Pitbull, which there's no shame in coming up short against him when you fight for Bellator. But this really is a crossroads fight for him. If he wins against Mads Burnell, he firmly reinstates himself in the sort of contender circle of the Bellator featherweight division. But a loss, I mean, where does he go from there at that point? Go on, mate. Let's hear your take on this fight.
No, I spoke with Pedro last week, and that interview is going to drop tomorrow on the site. But I spoke to Pedro, and just the sentiment of that interview was we both agreed. I just mentioned to him it's a pivotal fight, as it is for his SBG teammate Peter Queally. They're both facing really pivotal matchups in terms of their crossroads of their career at Bellator. You know what I mean? I think with the case of Pedro is he got off to such a bright start in Bellator, with his transition from Cage Legacy, and there was just that hype initially. This kind of guy who's after coming out of nowhere, and his wins over Sam Cecilia, and you know what I mean, immediately cast into that bracket against Patricio, and you know what I mean, Patricio picked him. And there's no shame in losing to Patricio Pitbull at that stage. He's still very young in his career, do you know what I mean? But it is, make no mistake about it, he had that close loss against I can't just remember. It's just not coming to mind at the moment. Last time out, he thought it was a close loss, but we both agree that it really is a pivotal fight for him. And the main sentiment he shared with me is he wants, like, he turned in a fight of the night against Daniel Weichel in November last year. That was he showed incredible grit and heart just to survive a couple of knockdowns. There was a slew of knockdowns throughout those 3 rounds against Weichel to take.
Weichel's a good fighter as well. He's a very
good fighter, very, very good fighter, very experienced. He's been around the block. But no, Pedro just mentioned how he wants, like, he just stressed clean. He wants a clean performance. He doesn't want, if I suppose if you're looking at bonuses, you don't want to fight of the night. He wants a performance of the night against Mads, which I think, granted, it's very, very hard to look clean or kind of technical against Mads Burnell. You know what I mean? Mads just makes that a very, very difficult thing to do against them. Like, the sentiment that's been shared, like, for years, ever since Mads' departure from the UFC, is the UFC have made a mistake letting Mads go. He's just that so technical and so precise, and like, he has it all. You know what I mean? He's a heavy, very, very heavy hands, and his grappling game speaks for itself. His wrestling game speaks for itself 100%.
Yeah. How do you think, or how do you see, if Pedro Carvalho wins this fight, how do you see him having his hand raised? What would you reckon his route to victory would be?
It's a tough one as well. It's a real tough one. You're facing 3 rounds with Mads Burnell, and you know what I mean. So, if you kind of give up the first couple of minutes of those rounds, or even the first round, this half of the second round, the fight kind of escapes, doesn't it? You know what I mean? Especially against a guy like Mads, who can just exact his will and just build up minutes of control. And I think it has to be on the feet as well. But make no bones about it, Mads Burnell is a slick striker in his own regard. But I think you kind of have to look at Pedro on the feet. You know what I mean? Mixing things up on the feet and introducing a few kicks and just different weapons he can use from training with the guys up at SBG, like him and Peter have trained extensively for their respective careers. You know what I mean? But no, you kind of have to look at Pedro trying to get into a rhythm like he did against Weichel in moments last November, because that was a very tough fight for him as well. But it's kind of like, I think it's 3 versus 5. I think it's number 3 versus number 5 in the division.
Yeah, it's something like that.
And both guys have just, they've kind of outlined their intentions to maybe win this one and then insert themselves into a title limiter. Now, Pedro mentioned the likes of Aaron Pico and getting that fight against Jeremy Kennedy back. But make no mistake about it, all eyes have to be focused solely on tunnel vision on Mads Burnell.
I do think it's a good shout saying the kicking game against Mads Burnell might work, because he is so boxing heavy when he's in the striking department. If you can chew up that lead leg and start to take away the lead leg, which obviously impacts the wrestling, and chew him up from range a bit, that might be Pedro's best way to go. But I find it hard not to back Mads Burnell in this. I just think he's such a complete fighter, and I feel like he could be competing at the top of any promotion in the world, essentially.
100%. You mentioned yourself those 2 wins against, especially like if you look at, like, that was a close win against Emmanuel Sanchez, but he still got across the line, and particularly Saul Rogers as well. Like, Emmanuel Sanchez has been a staple in Bellator for years, competing twice. I think he's fought Patricio twice. I think he has. They're big wins. They're really big wins for him. You know what I mean? And it looks like you would have to kind of favor Mads just based on his ability to kind of control the pace and like mix things up. It's more just an ability to mix things up. I think Mads obviously has that wrestling background, but he has the striking on the feet to deal with a customer like Pedro.
100%. So next we have Kieran Clarke, undefeated Irish prospect, coming against Raphael Hudson, who I believe is stepping up on short notice. Very short notice, in fact. Who was Clarke initially meant to fight?
Kieran was meant to fight George Sasu, I think, initially. That literally got announced yesterday. So yesterday when we're recording this, but no, Kieran, like you mentioned there, you just mentioned from the start, Kieran is a prospect in every sense of the word. Generally, he's got that massive following. Like, I think, I don't want to misquote someone, but I think last November, it could have been February, I think it was either the great Phil O'Connor or the great P.T. Carroll, they're both great in their own respects, mentioned he's like, he kind of gives that vibe of like early days Nick Diaz, Strikeforce, and early WEC days Nick Diaz, you know what I mean? He rallies and that support that he has from Drogheda, just north of Dublin, the fans come in their abundances to cheer on Kieran, and he's looking to go 6-0 this weekend, but it's kind of the unknown Raphael Hudson, you know what I mean? He's kind of that guy, like he's unknown more or less. There's not that much footage out there to try and scope this guy out, but Kieran is willing to take on all comers whenever.
Yeah, I literally know nothing about Raphael Hudson. Didn't even know. I can't even find his name on Tapology. Sorry, his age even. Yeah, this should be just a showcase for Clarke. Let's be honest, it should be when you're stepping on short notice, very short notice, on a 2-fight losing streak. His last win came via head kick 3 years ago. So yeah, that kind of tells you all you need to know. Clarke, he's a Bellator sort of homegrown product, isn't he? Every single one of his fights has been under the Bellator banner. So I'm sure they're hoping he's going to become one of their next big prospects. You can't really see it going any other way than
it's the unknown, isn't it? It's the unknown with this Raphael Hudson guy. You know what I mean? There's not an awful lot to take from his performances because there's not a lot of footage. You know what I mean? So all signs kind of point towards Kieran being able to secure this win and continue. Like, obviously, it's not the kind of performance or not the kind of opponent he wanted. Like, it's obviously the more high profile if he fights George as initially planned. But it's all kind of signs, all roads point toward Kieran just getting his hand raised here again.
Yeah, I feel like there isn't a whole lot more to say on it, really. I mean, yeah, literally, Hudson's age and date of birth, it just says NA, non-applicable on Tapology.
That's not a great sign.
Yeah, that tells you all you need to know. But let's hope, just for the future of Clarke and fights like these, let's just hope he gets another showcase victory, big highlight reel win, and then gets a bigger name opponent next. Because
yeah, it has to be one of these things where, like, it's September now. Bellator will likely come back. Well, who knows? But based on history, it's usually every February and then September, October, November, isn't it, when they come back over here? But if he's gonna, obviously, granted, he has to get through Raphael Hudson first, but he has to be calling for more activity, I imagine. You know what I mean? If he's going to cross the line and get past Hudson with relative ease, which he's more or less built to do at this stage, particularly the short notice of opponent change and all this, but he's got to be chomping at the bit to get back in there as quick and as soon as possible. Do you know what I mean?
100%. That is the main card as I see it, at least on Tapology. Fun main card, really like it. One fight that would almost definitely have been on the main card, maybe sort of the Coco main, would have been Brett Johns versus James Gallagher. Gallagher, of course, has a huge following. He sort of, like, there was a period of time where he was getting a lot of backlash for the comparisons to McGregor, and then he sort of, like, I don't know, outweighed it, like outlasted it even, and sort of has that following back again now. And he was taking on Brett Johns, who some really good wins in the UFC in his time. Trains at Shaw and May with Jack and Shaky and all them lot. So that would have been really probably one of the most competitive fights on the card had it played out. But of course, unfortunately, Gallagher's dropped out now. So Brett Johns is instead taking on Jordan Winski. Exceptional nickname, Jordan. I'm gonna Winski. Yeah, who's stepping on it's not the same sort of short notice as Hudson. I think he's had a good few weeks to sort of prepare. Johns rightfully is the favorite. He's the more experienced fighter. He's fought more high-level opposition. And he's got a nicely well-rounded game, to be honest, especially sort of top control grappling and submission threats. Most recently got a win over Kurashed Kakarov, who, I mean, yeah, he's not a fighter who's like a household name, but it's a nice first win in the UFC, in Bellator even. Before that, dropped a loss to Danny Sabatello, which is a weird one because back then no one knew who Danny Sabatello was. He stepped in on short notice to replace Tapology is telling me Mateus Matos, who I'm not familiar with, but yeah, Sabatello stepped in on that and just out wrestled the wrestler in Johns, which was a bit of a shock. But I feel like this is another fight where he can start to probably get his game going, insert himself into the top 5 of the division as a proper contender, as he rightfully should be. He's got the skill set. He's still young enough. how old is he? Yeah, he's 30. Still young enough to compete at a high level. I know he sort of said that this has been a hard training camp. I guess sort of changing opponent, it must be like mentally draining, and I think he's had some sort of physical issues in this fight. But you know, he's just, there's levels to this, aren't there? And I think John's similar to sort of Burnell, deserves to be at the top. I would probably put him as like consistently like top 15 fighter in say the UFC, or yeah, around the top 15. Whereas Bellator, I think he probably can be in that sort of top 5 mix. Like if they do another Bellator Grand Prix, I think he probably should be in it. So yeah, I imagine John's going to win. Possibly ground and pound TKO once again. Do you have a read?
Yeah, it's hard to look anything beyond a more or less dominant, or you know, I mean, cool plain sailing win for Brett Johns. He's supremely talented. Him and Jack Shaw, they're kind of flying the flag for Welsh MMA, aren't they, in that regard? But just touching on that potential, well, the failed James Gallagher fight now, that would have been a showcase. It would have been a very, very competitive fight, I think, on paper. Just as you mentioned there, like the comparisons to Conor, like you said, James just kind of outweighed that. You know what I mean? He outlasted that. People kind of got bored of the comparisons, and he, you know what I mean? He's gone over to he's changed. He's training under James Krause now, so he's set his own path. James has, but no, definitely you can see that fight. You can see that fight maybe get rescheduled in the future, end of year, maybe whatever next year. It's that's a really good fight. It's a fight I really want to see as well get rescheduled. So Scott Coker, get on
it. Yeah. In the build up to this fight, Johns has been quite vocal in his desire to get a win here in front of an Irish crowd, and you know, go out and call James Gallagher out and get that fight booked. And it is the fight to make right now, considering the Bellator Bantamweight Grand Prix is in motion right now. So you know, neither of these guys are going to be fighting you know, any of those top 4 guys. Who is it? Stotts, Sabatello, and the other 2.
Patchy Mix.
That's it, yeah. And yeah, it Gallagher is an interesting guy, and that fight is brilliant because you know, Gallagher's got like a lethal submission threat, hasn't he? He sort of has shown that time and time again. But then, you know, someone with sort of top control that Brett Johns can put on someone. How does that play out? It's interesting. It was the Bandejas knockout, wasn't it, where people started really getting sick of Gallagher. And
yeah, even prior to that, you know, even leading up to that fight, and of course the aftermath as well. But it's, you know, like you mentioned, that James has completely like sailed his own ship now, and he's paving his own road for himself. But no, 100%, that's a fight that needs to be revisited. Like you mentioned, he's got that supreme submission threat. Like James always stood out at SPG as one of these guys that can catch a submission from anywhere, more or less. But no, they've got to revisit that fight 100%. Even against Patchy Mix in November of last year for James, he really did show some improvements, and that was a massive fight against like Mix, a fantastic fighter.
Yeah,
Mix fresh off a win against Kyoji Horiguchi, you know what I mean? In his own right, Mix is a supremely talented fighter.
Yeah, he's elite. Yeah, you know what? Across all promotions right now, bantamweight is in a very good place.
Bantamweight is the division. Bantamweight is the place to be.
I honestly, for so long, I tried to hold out that lightweight's the one, but I'm slowly being converted. I think, like, you can't help it. Just, yeah. But I think it's only like PFL don't have a bantamweight division yet, but yeah, they need to get in on that as well, just because it's just fireworks after fireworks. We're not going to sort of talk about any of the other fights now, because that's the main card sorted, and obviously the Johns fight, which would have been a main card bout. Some bouts just to sort of keep an eye on though. Brian Moore, the Pike Man, brilliant nickname. I absolutely love that nickname.
Represent Wexford, yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Stepping in against Carvalho Silva. Moore's a pretty big favorite in that fight, but he's on a 2-fight losing streak, so he needs to get back to in fact, his last loss came to, I know it didn't. His last win came against Jordan Winski, who's fighting Johns, of course.
Yeah, Jordan Winski on short notice as well. But that last fight, I think, did he fight in February? Did he fight last February?
6 months ago. John L. Lugo.
He fought in February, Brian Moore, and it was a very, very, very close fight against John L. Lugo.
Lugo's good.
Technical fight that was very, very close. It could have went either way, but No, Brian has been home. Like he's always been. I always remember John Kavanagh touted Brian Moore as one of the best strikers in SPG. Like his boxing is very, very, very slick, and it's just he just needs to get that string of wins run under him. And he's I think this weekend he'll go down as, I think I seen a stat on Twitter. He'll be the most active fighter in Bellator history, Irish activity wise for Irish fighters. Yeah.
No way. That's cool. Yeah, should be a good fight. Carl Albrechtsen versus Carl Moore as well. Albrechtsen, a heavy favorite on a nice 4-5 winning streak, which includes a win over Victor name. Oh, I read that as Vadim Nemkov, then I was like, wow. Going up against Carl Moore. Carl Moore hasn't fought for nearly 3 years. So I think maybe a bit of a gimme fight for Albrechtsen, but he's a very good fighter. Keep an eye on that one. Dara Kelly is another Irish prospect who's on the up and up. 1-0. Maybe like the next sort of Kieran Clarke, because 1-0 with a Bellator win. Submitted Junior Morgan via guillotine. And Kane Musa as well in the mix versus Georgi Karakanyan, which is actually that's a super competitive fight.
It's a bit of a sleeper fight. Yeah, Georgie's been around for years as well. He has that notable win in Dublin against James Redmond.
Yeah.
Paul Redmond, excuse me. No, it's Georgi Karakanyan and Kane Musa. You know what I mean? Kane was meant to fight Peter Queally, and he still wants to get that fight back. Kane does, but I think Peter's looking for pastures new. No, Georgie's been around for years as well. It's a bit of a sleeper fight.
Yeah. Georgie got one over Keeper Crosby as well. Yeah, that's a lovely sleeper fight. Honestly, yeah, all in all, very solid card. I'm very jealous that you're going to be there in person. But yeah, a lot of big names in the mix. You really have just like a great variety of fights, because there's, obviously you're topped off by sort of two veteran showcase fights with Queally and Henderson. You've got Romero versus Manhoef as well, two just like athletic freak veterans, and especially Romero, a very well-known name. We've got some of the more like competitive bouts with Burnell and Carvalho, McCourt and Silva. What was the other one that I said was? Oh no, it would have been Gallagher versus Johns, but that one fell off. But even seeing Brett Johns back in action, it is going to be a treat. So yeah, it's going to be a cracking card. I will throw together, just give off a quick. I'm going to give off two small parlays just so we can still call this a betting preview. Number one, we have Kieran Clarke to beat Rafael Hudson, Yo Romero to beat Melvin Manhoef, and Brett Johns to beat Jordan Winski. Parlayed up together, you get that at even money. Why not? And then also another parlay that also comes out at even money: Mads Burnell, Dara Kelly, and Carl Albrechtsen. All relatively heavy favorites. A 3-piece parlay that's coming up at only even money. It's all right. I feel quite confident in all these guys. But yeah, you know what? Bellator have had some like shock upsets as of late. So yeah, probably don't tell me. But that should be a good one.
No, it's a good card. Like you said, it's a good card from top to bottom. It is like obviously the we're missing out on Brett Johns and James Gallagher that would have found his place in the main card 100%, absolutely. But you kind of have that main card where it's like a mix of that fan favorite matchup between Yoel and Manhoef, and you've got that main event between obviously hometown favorite Peter Queally and Benson Henderson. But you've also got like it's a good showcase for the likes of Kieran Clarke. He's relatively making his way through the game at this stage of his career. Like he's still very, very young in this stage of his career, but it's a good showcase. The main card in the Tree Arena, and you've got the return of Liam McCourt. No, it's a good card. It's a very competitive card on paper, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I honestly, Bellator's Dublin cards have been going from good to great as of late. Like they've really, they turn out, they put on some good effort into some of the cards. So yeah, it's a great one. And then up next, there's Bellator Pitbull versus Borax as well in Long Beach, which is going to be a good one next. I think another of our writers, Nikhil Sharma, is going to be attending that live. So he's going to jump on for a preview show. possibly with me or with Ollie Brockett, who does the Contender Series show. So yeah, keep an eye out for that one. Ross, where can people find you on social media to catch your work and follow you?
People can find me on Twitter at Ross_Markey for all your latest news, and try just to keep up to date on that. That's my main platform. But no, of course, find me on LowKick over there. We're doing serious great work over there. So we are, all the guys.
Yeah, man. Yeah, we've got a great thing going at LowKick right now. So yeah, go check out the site. Drop us a subscribe to us on social media. Drop us a follow on wherever. And yeah, next week there's UFC Dern versus Yan Xiaonan, which we'll drop another preview for. We'll get on Bellator. The last episode of Dana White's Contender Series with Bo Nickel featuring. So preview shows on all of those. So yeah, tune in. And thanks for watching.
Make sure to subscribe to the LowKick MMA YouTube channel for all the latest news, event previews, and interviews with some of the biggest stars in MMA.